Ciao e benvenuti al Tavolo Italiano. Welcome to the Italian table and the 8th installment of the video series Tips on Learning Italian. As a quick review, so far we've had the introduction. We talked about the first mistake, being realistic, defining what you want to do, sources for study material, support elements, and tips on learning vocabulary. Today we're going to be talking about working out the kinks in writing. In doing this, we continue with the nuts and bolts of learning Italian, which is actually my favorite subject. Perché il mio italiano non è perfetto, io non sono fluente, ma posso comunicare abbastanza bene. So what I just said was, my Italian isn't perfect and I'm not fluent, but I can communicate well enough. This is because of these little tips that, once again, either I've picked up from other people or I've learned on my own. And I'm hoping to help you in your quest for learning Italian, being able to communicate in Italian, by sharing these tips and tricks with you. So if your goal is to learn Italian properly, then this lesson can be of great benefit to you. By working out the kinks in writing using the simple method that we'll be discussing, it makes it easier for you to speak proper Italian naturally. The idea is to frequently practice this method so that proper grammar practices become second nature and you are not spending so much time during conversation worrying about gender or tenses, etc. It's actually a very simple exercise, but for some reason the idea never occurs to many students. One thing that's important to remember in this exercise, though, is that perfection is not the goal unless you have already learned all of the grammatical rules that exist for Italian, in which case it would be unlikely that you would be following this video series. I don't know all of the grammatical rules in Italian. Who knows how many there are? Instead, the goal is to be able to apply all of the grammatical rules that you have learned. For example, if the only grammatical rule that you have learned so far is about gender, then that would be the point of this exercise. And if you got all of your gender correct and everything in agreement, then hooray, you've succeeded. On the other hand, if you are at a point where you already know a variety of grammatical rules about the Italian language, then this exercise is about all of those at once. So here's what you do. First of all, you start off by writing something down, or on a computer or by hand, doesn't really matter. Now this is best accomplished if you have something that you actually need to write anyway. Maybe communicating with a pen pal, or answering a post from an Italian on Facebook or a other social type network. Now, if you're not familiar with any of these social networks, you can accomplish this obviously on the Tavolo Italiano Facebook page, or by joining the Facebook group and starting a conversation in Italian, or responding to something that an Italian said. If you don't have any opportunity to do that, then just write something down that you're thinking in Italian. Try to convey an idea in Italian, okay? Then step 2 is simply to play editor to what you wrote and examine the grammatical aspect of your writing, one grammatical rule at a time for each of the grammatical rules you know. Believe it or not, I would say probably anywhere from 60 to 80% of the mistakes that students of Italian make are things that they're aware of. Now, once again, the point of this exercise isn't to make whatever you wrote perfect in Italian. Instead, it's to make sure that you've observed all of the grammatical rules that you should be familiar about. So in advance of doing this exercise, you might want to make a list of all of the grammatical rules. For instance, that feminine nouns require feminine articles and feminine adjectives, etc. Adjectives and articles have to agree with the noun and gender. Like bambina. Bambina is a feminine word, so you would say una bambina, not un bambina. If you're familiar with verb tenses or how to conjugate a verb, make sure the verb agrees with the subject. Okay? And take one of those rules at a time and examine your writing and see if you followed them. Now, a lot of people would say, well, wouldn't it be easier just to have all those rules there while you're writing? Well, I don't know if it would be easier, but I understand the premise that it would be more expedient. However, though, what I want you to do is I want you to write naturally. I want you to write what you're thinking. I want you to write it the way that you would say it. Okay? The reason being is this helps you pinpoint the areas that you need work in. Not to mention, if you write it and then go back and examine it and find the mistakes you made, I don't want you to try to make mistakes. I just don't want you to overthink it while you're writing it. I want you to write it as naturally and as fluently as possible. In other words, don't really sweat bullets over this. The point of writing it down initially isn't to make sure that it's perfect. In fact, that's not the point of this exercise. But it's to represent what you would say if you were speaking it, if you were trying to flow with Italian, because you wouldn't have the time to overthink it. If you did take the time to overthink it while speaking it, then your spoken Italian would become hard to understand simply because it would take you so long to get anything out. The point of this exercise is to find out where you're weak, find out where you're making these mistakes, and then correcting them. And in doing so, you create a greater opportunity for learning, for retention. Because when you find them and correct them, and then you do it a second time, find them and correct them, and find them and correct them, you're going to remember them more readily, and eventually you're not going to be making those mistakes. So that when you speak Italian, you're already going to be thinking that. It's going to come more of a second nature. So for the sake of this video series, I know that there are probably some semi-advanced, maybe even advanced students watching, but there's also people that are just starting Italian. So I want to try to keep this as simple as possible on the example, and you'll see it pop up on the video as we discuss it. I'll scoot over here, make a little more room. So let's take, for instance, the following couple of sentences. Okay? Studio italiano perché è una lingua molto bella. Voglio parlare italiano quando ci vado. E voi? Vai mai all'Italia? Okay, so now let's take a look at what I've written. And let's see, let's just run it through the paces of a couple of different grammatical rules and see how it pans out. So for instance, lingua. Lingua. Una parola. Feminine, right? It's a feminine word. So therefore, I can't use un, that should be una. And I can't use bello, it should be bella. So in this exercise, you would correct it right there. Where una is, you'd write una. Where bello is, you'd write bella. Now let's look at the verbs, the conjugation of the verbs. Look at the last sentence. Vai mai all'Italia. What's wrong with the verb there? Well, the sentence actually starts with e voi, which is a second person plural, meaning I couldn't use vai because that's a second person singular. I have to use andate. And then what about all'Italia? Well, if you've gotten just a little bit farther along in your Italian studies, you should know that when you're talking about going to Italy, that you have to use the preposition in and not a. It's in Italia. So therefore, we rewrite our sentence now with the corrections. So we have studio italiano perché è una lingua molto bella. Voglio parlare italiano quando ci vado. E voi? Andate mai in Italia? Okay, so I'm not even claiming that group of sentences is 100% correct. But what I am telling you is the things that we corrected are correct. And I know that there might be someone out there saying, oh, come on, these are, to be plain blunt, chuck, stupid mistakes. But how many of you have written something on Facebook or said something to an Italian or did an exercise in a book or a course, and you go to correct it, maybe through an answer sheet in the back, or an Italian corrects it for you, and it's something you go, oh, I should have known that. That's what this exercise is all about. It teaches us a couple of important things. Number one, it teaches us making a mistake isn't a devastating thing. It isn't necessarily a terrible thing, because it's a great opportunity to learn. It's a great opportunity to retain what we've learned, to be able to remember so that we don't do it again. The other thing is it teaches us, it reinforces those grammatical rules, so that when we speak, we don't have to speak like studio italiano perché una lingua molto bella. We can speak a little more fluid. Io studio italiano perché una lingua molto bella. And we can focus more on putting a little bit of passion into what we're saying. Focus a little more on the person that we're talking to and having a conversation. Okay? Just like with pronunciation, how I recommended that you really try to get your pronunciation down first. First things first. Well, not get it down perfect, but become familiar enough with it to where you're not struggling so much, to where you're not having to think about how every word is pronounced when you're trying to learn new vocabulary or how to conjugate a verb. The same thing is true here. Once you get to a point where you want to try to be conversational, even if it's just about basic things, where's a restaurant, do you speak English, whatever, I want these grammatical rules to become second nature for you. Now, as you're starting off, you're saying, well, I don't know any grammatical rules, or I only know one or two. You know what? That's the perfect time to start doing this. Because the more that you do it, you practice writing, you go back and grade it. Practice writing, go back and grade it. But remember, when you write it, don't write it with a bunch of manuals or notes in front of you. Just sit down and write it as normally as possible. And then check it. Excuse me. And in doing so, you will improve your mastery of the grammatical rules of the Italian language. So I hope that you found this video useful. I hope you find all of them useful. And I hope you glean a little something from these tips. Probably a lot of you already know some of these. Maybe you know all of these. And I don't claim to know everything. I just hope to share enough so that some of you will glean something out of some of these videos that will help you in your quest to learn Italian, because it truly is a beautiful language. Now remember, you can find this video referred to in a lot of other references and things that can help you on Tavolo.com. Also, if you like this video and you want to know when new videos are coming out, please feel free to subscribe to our YouTube channel. And if you really think that this is worthwhile material, don't hesitate to tell your friends or anybody you know of that might be wanting to learn Italian. Right now I want to thank you very much for all of your support, for watching this video, for studying with Il Tavolo Italiano. Grazie mille, ciao, buona fortuna, and I hope to see you with the next video.